Welcome to my live webinar. Thank you so much for joining. Jazakallah khair. You guys are super awesome. I really appreciate you being a part of this. And I wanted to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Amina Mabrook, and I'm a Muslim mom of 2 kids and the CEO of Aspire Learning Tools. And Aspire Learning Tools develops high quality games for Muslim kids that spark their young minds' curiosity, instill a sense of understanding about their faith, and it really helps them foster the lifelong love for learning Islam. And I will talk to you a little bit more about this towards the end of our time together. So let's consider today's topic, which is why don't we celebrate Halloween, Mom? So let's segue into today's agenda. What are we going to talk about? We are going to discuss the mindset and framework of a Muslim parent. Because this is basically the base of where I base my decision-making process is the mindset, and then what is the framework that I use when I choose to opt in to certain activities and when I choose to opt out. The second thing we are going to talk about is why don't we celebrate Halloween, Mom? How do I answer this and how do I address it for my kids? And hopefully this will inspire you and empower you on how to empower your Muslim kids. And lastly, how to teach life skills. How do we use this opportunity to teach our Muslim kids life skills? And as you notice, there is a live chat, so feel free to put in any questions that you may have throughout our time together here today, and I'll be more than happy to answer them to the best of my ability. So the mindset and framework of a Muslim parent. What does that mean? What does that entail? So the mindset is basically the established attitude. It's the established attitude that I have as a Muslim mom about being Muslim, right? And it comes from the way I think and feel, which is then reflected within my behavior towards my kids. And the reason why I start off with this is because I am one of you and I completely understand that the media or society, without going into too much detail, we've been under a gray cloud for quite some time. And sometimes that may affect the way I think and feel about my own identity, which is then reflected through my behavior towards, and then my kids are affected by this. So what the thoughts that goes on in my head, I have to be very mindful of it. These are really some of the statements that I do say to myself is I am happy. I love being a Muslim. I am awesome. I am grateful. I am giving. I am content with my life. And all of these tend to reflect in your behavior without even knowing. It's very subliminal, but your kids are easily affected by this. So mindset is very important to establish and to be very aware when you're parenting your kids that the attitude that I have about my own identity as a Muslim is awesome. And it tends to reflect through your behavior and your kids feed off of this. Now, the second thing I would like to talk about is framework. What is the framework or the supporting structure that I tend to use when I need basically a guideline, when I'm dealing with situations, issues, or circumstances, and when I need to decide on what is the next right move for my kids here in the West or all over the world. So the framework is a supporting structure. The supporting structure, if we break it down, it's a guideline which you use in order to deal with problems or to decide what to do next. So mindset, framework, they tend to go together. They go together. I don't ever do one without the other. I have to have a supporting structure, which is my Quran, and the mindset, my attitude about being a Muslim is awesome. And both of them reflect in my behavior and the way I parent my kids. This is basically the million-dollar question that we need to ask ourselves, or that I ask myself as a mom, is what is the attitude, the mindset that I have, and supporting structure you need to use when your Muslim child asks you is why don't we celebrate Halloween, Mom? We're going to talk about that a little bit further. The kind of mindset or framework that I tend to use comes from Surah Al-Kafirun, chapter 109, verse 1 through 6. And the reason I have chosen this is because it's very easy to explain it to your Muslim kids. They probably have the surah already memorized, or they're in the works of memorizing the surah. but this is basically the surah that I use as a supporting structure or the framework that I tend to use. So the story goes is some kuffar wanted an agreement from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They would agree to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if the Muslims would worship their idols. So this was kind of the trade-off that the kuffar wanted to do, the trade-off that the non-believers wanted to do, or those outside the folds of Islam, that if the Muslims worship the idols, the kuffar would worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala another day. But this was the response of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah rejected the kuffar's offer. So it was very clear and very simple. So in this surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informs Prophet Muhammad that there cannot be any form of compromise in faith. And compromise can be broken down in so many different ways. It could be a trade-off, where in this specific scenario, the kuffar wanted a trade-off in value, right? You believe in our faith one day and we believe in yours. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala completely rejected this concept that they were initiating to Prophet Muhammad. It could be someone making a deal with you. And these are some things that we need to be mindful of, that when we're making decisions for our Muslim kids, or the way I choose to be mindful of it is when I'm making a decision for my Muslim kids, this is kind of the supporting structure that I use. What trade-off are we making when we choose to engage in holidays that are outside the folds of Islam? That's basically how I choose to do it. Even though there's no compromise in faith, this surah is very balanced, subhanAllah. So on the other hand, even though there's no compromise, there should be no compulsion in faith either. We know this very well. The Muslims were not going to give up their firm belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nor were the kuffar prepared to give up their idolatry. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his Sahaba, the companions, did not want to force the kuffar to accept Islam. So they weren't going to force them to accept the faith, nor was Prophet Muhammad and his Sahaba willing to compromise their faith to please the kuffar. And the reason this is highlighted is because sometimes as a mom, I tend to feel sometimes like I feel bad not engaging, or somehow they might think that I'm not an integral part of society if I choose not to engage. But it clearly states that we need to be mindful that when we choose to be a part of certain activities or certain holidays, that it's not coming from a place of pleasing the other. We need to definitely use a supporting structure in our decision-making process moving forward. So Rasulullah was commanded to leave them to their idol worship. And in return, this is what I love about it, the kuffar were to allow the Muslims to practice their faith in peace. So it's not just that we do not force others, but also the other will allow us to practice our faith in peace, which is super awesome. So key takeaway points about the mindset and framework of a Muslim parent. The mindset is the established attitude. And we know for a fact that that is derived from the way we think and feel about being a Muslim, and that's projected through our behavior towards our kids. So what I tend to say to myself, because I have to constantly remind myself, is that I have a positive and content mindset about being a Muslim. My attitude is I do not compromise anything in my faith and respectfully walk away. I am mindful about my thoughts and feelings because it's reflected in my behavior towards my kids. Key takeaway points about framework. Framework is a supporting structure. It gives you a set of guideline on when something like this were to rise in your home and what is the next right move for your kid. And the supporting structure for me is, or the framework that I tend to use as a Muslim parent is Surah Al-Kafirun, because it clearly states that you have your faith, I have mine, and I'm completely content with it, and I love being a Muslim. So Surah Al-Kafirun, chapter 109, verse 1 through 6, gives me a supporting structure for when I'm dealing with issues in my home. And it's basically a checklist when I need to decide what to do next for my Muslim kids. So the next thing we are going to dive deep into is why don't we celebrate Halloween, Mom? I decided to break this up into 3 different things to simplify the information and the way I've approached it in my home, as far as how to answer this question. And the first one is to explain. You need to explain why we don't celebrate it. Why have we chosen to opt out of certain activities, certain events to your kids? This helps them understand who they are and their identity as a Muslim. The second one is to clarify, have conversations and clarify what is the supporting structure or the framework that you use as your guiding principle in your home moving forward when you decide certain things to do and not to do. The third thing, which is extremely important, is expectation setting. This one worked wonders in my home because as long that I can inform them about what is it that I expect out of them as a parent, it really does minimize a lot of these questions or their confusion on why we choose not to do certain things. So explaining. What does that mean and what does that look like? So this is basically how I explain it. And again, I make sure that I have the right mindset and framework in mind, positive, confident. I love being a Muslim. Let's have a conversation and just be honest about it. So I start to explain it by giving them a little bit of an understanding, the history of Halloween. And if you do any search on YouTube, you can find immense amount of information on there that would give you a short clip or video that is geared towards your kids that explains the history of Halloween. So after you kind of go over some of the history of Halloween and you understand it, like for an example here, 2,000 years ago, there was a Celtic festival called Samhain, and it was actually called Halloween at the time. Now it's called Halloween, but at the time it was called Samhain. And basically the Celts would celebrate Samhain on the 1st of November, which marked the end of summer and the harvest of their crop. And basically the dark, cold winter oftentimes was associated with death. So after they've gathered their crop, and of course the seasons would shift and they would go into the winter, this was often associated with death and very sad time for them because nothing would grow for quite some time, and whatever they had, they had. So on October 31st, the Celts believed that the ghost of the dead would return to Earth. And that's basically where Halloween was derived from. The history of trick or treat, which dates back to the early All Souls Day, which was celebrated in England. And during the festival, the festivities, poor citizens would beg for food. And in exchange for food, the families would give them pastries called soul cakes, as long as they would promise to pray for their family. So trick or treat came from, I give you soul cake, a cake that was called soul cake, and in return, you would basically pray for my family who's come to pass. And explaining this to your kids lets them know and understand that these are not rooted in our faith. And the view of the dead or the view of those who've come to pass is completely different in Islam. And you can actually branch off and explain that even further with your kids. Explain to them, how we view those who've come to pass. What does that look like in Islam in comparison to, the way Halloween is celebrated. The second thing I would like to talk about is clarify. So clarifying is to inform your Muslim kids what is your supporting structure or framework that you base your decision-making process as a parent. So this is basically how I converse with my kids. So did you know that 1400 years ago, the kuffar approached Muhammad with an agreement? So my kids would be like, oh, well, what was that agreement? The kuffar would agree to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if the Muslims would worship their idols. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the surah Al-Kafirun, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informed Muhammad that there cannot be any form of compromise in faith. So say to yourself, or we even vocalize this out loud because words are very powerful, we are not prepared to compromise our faith, because this is really a really awesome opportunity to engage in an open conversation with your kids. Because when we clarify that there is no compromise in faith, well, think about it. If we choose to engage in one holiday, well, what about the other? Or if I choose to opt in this holiday, what seed am I planting moving forward? 5, 10, 15 years from now, what's the outcome? If I compromise on this now, what else am I going to end up compromising on, whether it's intentional or not intentional? But those are some of the things to be mindful of and to get your children to raise their awareness. Have those conversations, especially if they're older, because my daughter's 15, she's in high school, and to raise her awareness, we have these types of conversations. And the third thing is expectation settings. And this one is my favorite because it saved me wonders, and I'm going to show you how I've used this in my home. So, expectation setting is a way to reinforce family values in your home with your children. Expectation settings can be established by creating a family manifesto, which I will explain a little bit further. A family manifesto is basically a public declaration of what you stand for as a family. And public declaration doesn't mean you go outside and you declare what it is you stand for. This is amongst yourself as a family together, right? What is it that we stand for each other and for yourself as a member within the household? A family manifesto is basically a family mission statement declaring your intention towards each other as a family. Expectation settings also gives your children guiding principles to follow in their life moving forward when they have to start making decisions on their own. And something that I have learned as a parent is that repeat, repeat, repeat. To only say it once to your kids is a false assumption to think that, oh, they're going to understand it. It's a done deal. It's not. Repetition is so important. And this is why I think creating an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper or poster board where you and your kids engage together and kind of establish these guiding principles that you all want to live by in your home is so important because they are participating in it. They know how they fit in the family, how everybody fits in the family, and you work together. And also this 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that you have at home, it allows you to repeat in a simple manner. So what I would like to do now is show you my family manifesto, my family mission statement in hopes to inspire all of you to come up with your own, or feel free to use the one that I've come up with. So here's me with my kids, but of course they are much older. My son is 10 and my daughter is 15 at the time. So this is basically my family manifesto. I've taken some of the things that my children and I have come up with and kind of put it here for you guys to see. So I'll read a couple of these for you today. So my mistakes are there to learn from, not to label myself and others based on their mistakes. Surah Al-Kafirun is my guideline to use in order to deal with issues or to decide what to do next in my life. My life's a journey of discovery and I explore it with my family, not alone, with my family. I acknowledge my parents, siblings, feelings, and listen attentively with empathy and compassion. I do not compromise anything in my faith. I have chosen for myself Islam. I am responsible for my actions, feelings, and emotions, and what I choose not to do. And this is really important because what I choose to do, but also sometimes when we choose to opt out of certain activities, like for instance, sometimes they don't wake up for Fajr Salah. When you choose to opt out of those certain things, you're responsible for that. Especially my 15-year-old daughter, she's going to be held accountable and responsible for that. So choosing not to do certain things might not always be a good idea. I collect memories, not things, to stay away, to kind of remind them that quality time is what's valued here, not the gifts and the stuff that we might have as an extended blessing from Allah. I choose to treat my family with fairness and justice and contribute towards maintaining peace in my family. So this is basically what a family manifesto, you take certain things that you've learned from the Quran and incorporate it, have it as a sheet of paper where everybody can see it in the home. And it makes it so much easier for you to repeat, 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 inform them. This is basically how we publicly declare, we verbally announce this out loud to one another as a family. I would like to move forward and I'll keep checking your questions, so keep them coming. Thank you so much. So after you've explained the history of Halloween and where that's derived from, and like I mentioned, YouTube uh, has amazing videos that are geared specifically to kids. And what I would do is I would view them first, and then if they're along the lines of, kid friendly, I would then sit down and watch it with my kids, and we would have conversations about it. And after you've clarified, the supporting structure in your home and expectation settings, meaning what everybody expects from each other as a family, we do end up with this question, what's so wrong with wearing a Batman suit? And honestly, there's nothing wrong with it. They love to play pretend. What I tend to do with my son when something like this were to arise is talk about the attributes of Batman, like what makes Batman so awesome. Because a lot of times when you break down some of the attributes or characteristics about that character that they look up to, those are maybe some of the qualities that you want to start working on with your kids, or these are some of the qualities that you want your child to draw their attention to say, you know, that's awesome. Batman was really admirable, and the reason he was admirable is because he had obsessive passion towards helping people. And those are some of the things that you can have a conversation with your kids. So Batman had physical strength, you know, he was intelligent in his own way. He was excellent at avoiding frictional circumstances. He was very inspirational, and this is basically how I speak with my kids. He had obsessive passion to help his people. So then, after I really talk about the characteristics of Batman, how can I tie this into what we know about Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? So we know for a fact that Prophet Muhammad had the strength of 70 men, and that supersedes the strength of Batman. Prophet Muhammad had intelligence like no other. So he was also able to avoid frictional circumstances. He was very inspirational in his own way. And you can tie stories of Prophet Muhammad to elaborate further. So for instance, frictional circumstances like when we know the story of the Black Stone, there was a disagreement amongst the tribes of who was going to put in the Black Stone in the Kaaba. And he chose a member from each tribe, and from there they worked together to put the Black Stone into the Kaaba. So he was also very inspirational. Prophet Muhammad had an obsessive passion to help others, and he always went to Ghar Hira to meditate and contemplate and try to find ways on how to help his people. And he was very admirable in his own way because he was known as Sadiq al-Amin, the honest and trustworthy. This is basically how I connect something they really enjoy really well with their deen, their faith. That way they're able to see it in a positive manner and conversation. And I want to draw your attention to this because it's something that I've realized or paid attention to as a parent is when I ask my son, why do you want to celebrate Halloween? This was his response, because I'm with my friends and I get to play pretend and I get all the candy in the world. Friends, play pretend, and candy. Those were the three things that really drew him towards Halloween. So it wasn't necessarily being a part of it. It was the fact that he was with his friends. He was able to play pretend. And of course, every child loves candy. And you can easily substitute this at another day, at another time, and create your own fun activities for your kids. Something else I would like to also draw your attention to that I have found it's very subliminal, but it kind of seeps in as a parent when you're trying to decide on whether or not you should take part in this or not, is don't ever parent out of guilt. And trust me, I've been there and I've parented out of guilt. And I'm going to read this because it's so simple and straight to the point. So giving into guilty feelings teaches your child that guilt is intolerable. And kids who think guilt is horrible won't be able to say no to someone who says, be a friend and let me copy your paper. Or if you loved me, you'd do this for me. So this is basically the message that it gives off to our kids when we parent out of guilt, is they're not able to say no because they feel guilty, so they constantly opt in and do certain things even though they don't want to, but because I feel guilty, I do it. So this is kind of the messaging that we're giving our kids if we parent out of guilt. So show your kids that even though you feel guilty sometimes, and all good parents do, just like all of you here today at the live webinar, um, you're not going to allow your uncomfortable emotions. Don't allow your uncomfortable emotions to get in the way of making wise decisions. So, and this is where I go back to my supporting structure, the family manifesto, the 8.5 by 11 paper that I put on the wall, because when I'm not feeling like I'm all there as a parent, and those days do tend to happen, when those uncomfortable emotions tend to rise inside of me, this is a really good way to stick to the guidelines in my home in making wise decisions instead of allowing this uncomfortable feeling of feeling guilty and then ending up making a decision that way. And then later on, you look back and you're like, this wasn't something that I really wanted to do. This wasn't very healthy or wise for my kids. So just something to be mindful of, that anything, it's not just Halloween, any holiday that doesn't coincide with the holidays mentioned in our faith, avoid parenting out of guilt. And when your children start to ask these questions where you feel like they're guilt tripping you, they're not necessarily, that's how I feel when my son is asking me questions, why this, why that, but sometimes I have to remind him, you know, don't focus so much on what everybody else is doing. How about focusing on yourself and how to better yourself as a Muslim or for yourself as a human being? And that's really important, to just center them and refocus them on where they need to be. Something else I would like to also make mention is satisfy your child's desire to spend time with you. Something I've noticed in my household is when I don't put it in my calendar to spend time with my kids, they tend to draw their attention somewhere else, where someone else would give them the attention that they seek from me as a mom. So making sure that you satisfy your child's desire to spend time with you. We are all busy. We are all consumed with work. Many of us work full time, and that's understandable. Some of us have 3, 5 kids even, mashallah, in the home. So it makes it challenging to kind of find divided attention of yourself to give to your kids. But trust me, this is a desire every child seeks, is they just want you. They want your time and they want to be with you. So something just to be mindful of as you move forward. So I'm going to check some of the questions as we check some of the questions before we move forward. Now we're going to segue into our last topic, which is how to teach life skills. I'm going to briefly touch on this as far as some of the ways where I was able to incorporate when I chose not to engage in certain things. How was I able to include life skills, like important life skills for my kids? I don't know if you've all watched the movie Home, but there is like a punchline where he says, "I fit out," and that's okay. And I think this is the message you need to drive home to your kids, as far as this is what's helped me with my Muslim kids as well, that to fit out and to not fit in, it's okay. You know, it's okay not to fit in. And this all has to drive back to their confidence, making sure that your children are confident in who they are. Because honestly, this is an issue with all families. It's not like a Muslim thing. All families experience their kids wanting to constantly engage in everything that's out there. But if it's not healthy for you mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually, opt out of it. Don't be a part of it, and be strong enough to say no. And be sure to model that in front of your kids, where they see you saying no. No different than when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rejected the agreement that they proposed to Prophet Muhammad. It was a straight up no. And that's okay. It is such a powerful word that sometimes we forget the importance of teaching them to say no, and that it's okay to fit out, and that if it doesn't coincide with making you a better human being mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, there's no need for it. And these things can be applied when they're with their friends in public school, because my children go to public school, they don't go to an Islamic school. And in public school, they're around different environments. There's peer pressure. They can be persuaded into doing certain things that really makes them uncomfortable, but sometimes because they feel guilty, they tend to be a part of it, and that's really danger. This all stems from confidence. I, as a Muslim mom, as a Muslim dad, be mindful of where it's stemming from when they're constantly wanting to be a part of certain things. Is it because the need to constantly fit in, the need to feel like people love you, or the need to get attention? All of these things, we all want attention, but not to the extent where we have to constantly feel like we need to be a part of something to get that attention. Then it's not healthy, because you're going to become an adult. you know all of these things become a habit, and we need to be very careful. Different is awesome, and that's also part of my family manifesto. Being different, not just as a Muslim, but each one of our kids are so unique in their own way, subhanallah. And you need to remind them that their strengths are unique to their own. Their strengths is what sets them apart from everyone else. And this is the way you're able to use your strengths to give back and make a difference in the world. No different than the way Batman made a difference in the world. you know? So these are just some of the conversations that you can have with your kids, and they need to hear it. They really need to hear it, because society, the noise around us is so strong that if we don't counteract that noise twice as loud, the noise of society will seep in. So the noise in your home, the structure in your home, how you choose to empower your kids, all of that is positive influence that you co-create in your home that helps them build this amazing confidence about who they are and moving forward and maintaining their identity as Muslims. Alhamdulillah, inshallah, bi'idhnillah. Another life skill that I like to teach them is, Prophet Muhammad advised us, your youth before your old age, your health before your sickness, your wealth before your poverty, your free time before you're preoccupied, and your life before your death. So my daughter is 15, and I always remind her, your youth before your old age. Yeah, but I have 10, 15, 20 years. We don't know that. We really don't. If you check the news, there's so many kids your age that have already come to pass, whether it's natural death or it was because of the choices that they made for themselves that led to them not existing anymore. So your youth before your old age. And I always try to engage them in things that interest them. My daughter loves art, and she's really taken it to another level. I've always been artistic in front of her, but this is something that she absolutely loves. So, take their skills and run with it. So this is something that you can do as well, is how remind them their youth before their old age. And this can be also part of your family manifesto, right? For them to be mindful, raise their self-awareness, and you do that by, or the way you do that, or I do that, honestly, is by having this posted on the wall, and I remind them, your youth before your old age. How are you spending your time today? With whom are you spending your time? These are really important life skills that you can teach them to empower them as Muslim kids. Something else that I have learned as a Muslim mom, raising my kids here in the West, and I myself was born in Brooklyn, New York. I was raised my whole life here in America. And something that I really realized is that we don't ever talk about how we should focus on ourselves, meaning your attention, where is it going? When my child is constantly asking me why we're not doing what this person is doing, or when he visits someone's home, And he's constantly telling me, well, why do they have this? And why can't you just get me that? Why is your attention focused on what other people have versus the blessing you have now? And why aren't you being grateful? And this is how I speak with my kids is however the world chooses to live their life, however the world chooses to celebrate their holidays, it is not my concern. It really is that simple. The simpler you make it, the easier it is moving forward to live your life. So as a Muslim mom, as I raise my kids, I walk my lane. What is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asking of me as a Muslim woman in the eyes of Allah first? And then what is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking me towards my kids? And I focus on myself. And focusing on yourself doesn't mean you become selfish in the process. No, you're actually building your personal self-confidence as a mom and dad for your kids. It ends up, it has a ripple effect. You have to focus on you first for it to project in your behavior and your attitude towards your kids, and that's okay. So, and for my kids, I also have to remind them, focus on you. Why are you so concerned about what the world is engaged in right now? Why is your attention always somewhere else versus what Rahim can do for himself, what Haneen can be better at today? What is it one thing that you can focus on to be an amazing person, to be an awesome human being? And that's how I speak with my kids. That really concludes our lesson today. Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for all the participants who were able to attend today for this awesome live webinar. Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much. Be sure to check out, follow us on Instagram, join our Facebook community, and you can check out our website. And of course, be sure to go to our website at aspirelearningtools.com to learn more about how to engage your Muslim kids to learn their faith in a fun and engaging way. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys for being here.